Welcome back to Blue Collar Coder. I'm Jack Carrington. And a couple weeks back in the live stream, I usually ask, what do you guys think I should go do next? And Alex Wright said, hey, you should look at this XState mechanism. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of cool. It's a state machine-based state manager that works in all kind of contexts, but it also works in React. And so I built out this kind of pizza ordering wizard thing just to try it out. And I'm actually really excited about it. I think it's really cool. And when I got done, I took that state machine and I put it into their visualizer that they have that goes along with all their tooling. And I was like, boom, this is really neat. So I'm excited about it. Let's go jump into the code and see if I can get you excited about it as well. Okay, so this is our pizza ordering workflow. You can first define what type of pizza you want, like a pepperoni pizza, then the toppings, then the address, and then it will show you how we're doing on the baking side of the house. Once you've ordered it, we're going to show you your status on your delivery, I guess. Let's try this out. We'll put in for a sausage pizza with nothing on top, just the sausage, and delivery to my house. Sure. And now we can start seeing that the status has now moved from deciding to baking, and the baking count is moving up every second. So for this, we're going to use a state manager called XState, which manages state using a state machine. So we're going to have multiple states in here, and every one of those steps along the way is going to be one of those states. We're also going to use Shards React. That's the UI toolkit. And for each individual form, we're going to use React Hook Form. Now, this is probably so simple that we could have used React Hook Form for the whole thing, but I really wanted to show off this XState and do it in a way that was pretty simple. So let's use Create React App for our pizza orderer app. Now I'll bring that up in VS Code. And we're going to add XState, the XState React bindings, shards for the UI toolkit, and then React Hook Form for the Forms Manager. Now let's start that up. And of course, we just get our standard Create React app. Now let's go remove pretty much everything from here. And give ourselves a little bit of a margined width padded kind of frame to start working in. And now the first thing that we're going to do is lay down our pizza state machine, which is essentially our state manager for this system. So I'm going to bring in machine from XState, and then I'm going to use that to create a state machine called pizza state machine, and I'm going to export that. And now you've got to give it an ID as well as the context. Now the context is essentially all the state inside your state machine, right? You've got the status, whether you're deciding or baking your pizza. The type of pizza, in this case, is going to default to pepperoni. And then the toppings, which will default to lots of toppings. And then address, which would be my home address. And now we're going to define the different states. So this is going to have 4 states. We're going to have set type, set topping, set address, and then finally start baking. And now we're going to define how the steps interrelate to each other. So in this case, I'm going to say when you're in set type state, then the next state is set toppings. And then in the set topping state, the next state is the set address state. Now that we got that done, I want to be able to set the previous states. So we want the user to be able to go back and forth. So in this case, from set address, we're going to go back to set toppings. In set toppings, we're going to go back to set type. We also need to set the initial state, the starting point. So I'm going to set that up at the top. Initial is we start out in set type. We're going to set the type first. So now if you have trouble visualizing that, let's go and see if we can make that a little bit easier for you. We're going to go over to the XState Visualizer and then paste in our code. And now it's going to actually visualize our state system, and it's interactive. So I can actually go and click on each one of these ons and actually move through the system. And you can do this with even really complex state machines. And then by the end, you're going to see that we actually have a fairly decently complex state machine. And we'll be able to visualize it and see all the state as it changes and all the events as we go through the system. It's really cool. Visualizer is kind of one of the things that's really sold me on this. All right, so the first thing we need to do to start using our cool new state machine is to bring in use machine from XState React. And then we'll go and bring in the CSS for our shards, just make it look pretty. And then we're going to bring in our state machine. And use machine is a hook that connects essentially the machine to React. And out of it, we get an array where the first item is the current state of the machine, and the second is a send function that we can then use to send events to that state machine. So let's just do ourselves a quick favor and just put out the current context. So remember, context is where we have that stored data. And we'll just drop that in there. And yeah, you can see basically a JSON payload that has our initial state in it. It's got the status, the type, the toppings, and then the address. Now in this example, we're going to be making a lot of components. So I'm going to create a new directory called components. And then within that, we're going to create two helper components. So the first one is steps. It's the big kind of banner bar that runs across the top that has type, toppings, address, and baking. The component is going to take a current value, and that's going to tell us what step are we on, right? If current is 1, then we're in type. If current is 2, then we're in toppings, and so on and so forth. So let's go make a nice little div here. We'll make it a grid. It's got 4 columns in it. And then we're going to iterate through each one of the steps. Put in another div with a key as step, and then the contents is step, but we need to make it a little more stylized. So let's set the font size to 20 point. And then the color is going to be, well, if it's less than the current index, then the text color is going to be white because we're going to show that on a light blue background. And then we're going to invert that essentially for the background. We're going to say that the background is light blue if the index is less than current. So basically just kind of show where we are in the status by just inverting the color scheme. Yeah, it's kind of pretty. Now we'll make it bold and then give ourselves a little bit of a border on the bottom. And now let's go bring in that component back into app. And then say that our current step is 1. Nice. Okay. Text CD is a little centering, so let's go fix that. All right. That's pretty. A little subtle, I'd say. I mean, the light blue doesn't contrast 100% well. Certainly wouldn't qualify as alley. All right, the next thing we're going to do is create a status component. And that's basically just going to take our context, which is the current state, and then what keys we want to display from that context. So we're going to use the shards layout components, which would be container, row, and column. And then we're going to set a little bit of a margin on our container. And then we're going to roll through all those keys that we're going to ask, we're going to request to be displayed, and show those as a key value pair, just so we can kind of keep up with whatever the state is that we're looking at. So this is basically going to give us 2 columns. The first is 2 wide, and the second is 10 wide, and out of 12. That makes sense, I guess. All right, let's now go bring in that into app as well. And then say that we want the context, and we want from that the status. All right, that's looking pretty good. Okay, so we've got our little helper components going. It's time to build our first form. And that's going to bring in the type of pizza. So again, we'll bring in React. In this case, we're also going to bring in React hook form. Yes. And we'll bring in our React shard stuff. We'll also bring in addition to container row and column, we'll bring in the input group and all of its stuff. So we have a nice display for our input fields. And we'll start defining our form. Now, each one of these forms is going to have at least an on next, probably, and then also maybe an on previous, if it can do that. For example, the toppings and address form are also going to have an on previous. And then we'll create our React hook form hook and get back from that register, which allows us to register components, errors, which is the current list of validation errors, and then handle submit, which we're going to use to extract the data and send it back to the state machine, the XState state machine. So we're going to set the validation modes to all in all, so they validate all the time. And then default values, we're just going to give that context, right? That's just the state. And we'll export this. And now we got to go actually visually build it. So we're going to wrap this thing in a form. And we're going to bring in the steps in the status. They're going to be part of it. All right, that's looking pretty good. And then we're going to create an input group around this component. And that's just going to give us a nice visual look to it. It's got the type text off to the side, and then it's got the form input, and it all looks kind of connected. You'll see it in a second. It looks nice. We'll add on there for the placeholder, pizza type. We'll set the name of the field to type. That's really important because that's what React hook form is going to key off of. And we'll say that invalid is true if you see type in the object that contains all the errors. And then finally, we're going to connect this to React hook form by using inner ref, by saying register and telling it the required is true, so that is a required field. And then we're going to put the buttons at the bottom. So by creating a container with a row, where it's only got one column, but it's offset by 10, so that it's off to the side, off to the right-hand side. And that's going to contain a button of type submit that says toppings, because toppings is the next place you want to go. So let's go bring in our type form. And just drop it in there, right? Give it the context. All right, so this is where we start connecting to our state machine and XState. We have this on next, and that's got a function. And that function is then going to use that send that we got from use machine to tell that pizza state machine, hey, I've got an event for you, and that's the next event. And since we've said that the next on the set type state is going to send us to set toppings, that's going to move that state machine from set type to state set toppings. Okay, let's go fix up a few little things here. Got to add a button. And then remove the current. All right, looking pretty good. So if I hit toppings here, nothing happens. And the reason is because we're not actually conditionally rendering the form. We're not actually looking at that state at all. We don't know where in the state machine we are. So let's go back and fix that in the code. And we're going to wrap this type form in a matches. I'm just going to say if the current state matches set type, then render the type form. Okay, cool. Okay, let's go make our next form. So we need a toppings form. And this is basically just going to be a copy and paste of our type form. It's pretty much exactly the same thing. So let's paste that in there. Now we're going to go change some stuff. We're going to have the status now show both status and type. We're going to set our step to 2. We're going to change the name to toppings form. Change the button name so that it goes to address. And then we're going to create an on previous, so we can handle that as well. So let's go and create another button for that. But this one is going to be on the left-hand side, and it's going to say type because it's going to go back to type. And we'll set that on-click handler to on previous. Get that all squared away. And now the only last thing to do is to go and change out the form field a little bit. So we'll just change that to toppings. And then change the placeholder text and the name and the invalid. All right, I think this is pretty good. So let's go bring that into our main app. And this time we'll say, great, if the current state matches set toppings, then we're going to render the toppings form. And we're also going to go and add that on previous. And then if we get that, we're going to send to the state machine the previous event. And that's going to send us back to set type. Okay, let's give it a go. So let's go to the next one. Awesome. And now let's go back. Fantastic. Looking really good so far. One thing I'm not doing is I'm not actually changing the state here. I'm not actually listening to the data coming back from the form. Like if I do and change pepperoni here, and I go and I hit basically next, the type isn't actually set. So we're going to need to actually make that happen. So the way that we're going to do that is going to go back into our state machine and add another event type. And we're going to call this type update. And it's going to say that we have some actions associated with that event. And one of those is to assign the type based on an incoming event value. And this assign is part of XState. Very handy helper function. So now we need to send another event before we send that next event. And that new event is going to be the one that updates the context with the new data. So in this case, we're going to send an object where type is the type of event. And in this case, it's type update. And then the value is whatever we're going to get from the data, which is coming in as a parameter to this callback. That's a little bit confusing in this case because I'm using type in a couple of different places. It makes more sense when we do toppings because that's just a different word, right? I'm overloading type here, but you'll see in a second, it'll be fine. I really actually couldn't come up with what is that? Is it like a pizza flavor? Is it a pizza style? What? It's type. It's type of pizza. It's a pepperoni pizza. It's a ham and sausage pizza, whatever. Okay, let's try it out. Looks like it's doing pretty good. Okay, I think we're good. So let's just get ahead of ourselves a little bit and go and set that same sort of event because we're going to need to do the same thing for toppings and address. So we're going to do toppings.update and then address.update. This is essentially exactly the same thing across the board. And we can also bring it back into that visualizer again. So let's go and drop it into the visualizer. And we can start to see, now we've got the next and the previous, and we've also got these update states, these update mini states or update events that are then going to dump essentially back into their original states. All right, let's go update the on next for toppings. And the next thing to do is to create our address form. So let's create yet another component. We'll call this one address form and basically paste this in and start making these changes. We're going to go and change the status and the step. And then the name. Change the button names. Change the placeholder and the name on the form input. Okay, I think that actually looks pretty good. So let's go back to our app and then import that address form. And then do another match on set address. and then bring in the address form. In this case, all we need to do is just update that, what data we're going to set, that update message. Now let's try it out. Make changes to every one. And then we get all the way to the end and nothing. Uh-oh. Well, we don't have any match for start baking. And that's the state that we're in when we're at the end. So let's go ahead and create that. And now all we're going to do in this one is we're just going to show that status, right? So just bring in the status. And then give it all the keys. Okay, let's try this again. Looking pretty good right at the end there. But I wouldn't mind having that banner bar along the top, so let's go and add that back in. And give it the current of 4. All right, that looks pretty nice. But, this is all synchronous state, right? So we want to do something that's got an asynchronous element to it. And in this case, if you're ordering a pizza, you want to know when it's going to arrive. You want to know what the status is. So we're going to give you a count in seconds of the amount of time that it's been baking, virtually baking, right? It's pretty ridiculous, but it is going to show us how to do some async work in this XState framework. So let's say that the first thing is that we want to go and set the status now to baking. So we're going to create an action. And that's another thing that you can do in the XState system that we haven't yet explored. And we're going to create an action called set baking. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say that when we enter the start baking state, we want you to run some actions. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to say entry, and that's going to take an array. It's going to do the set baking action, which we define in an actions key down below. And that's where we're going to say set baking, and then it's going to take a context. And then in that context, we're just going to say context status equals baking. All right, now the pizza's baking. Awesome. So automatically when we enter that state, we're going to run that action, and that's going to update our context. So let's take a look. There you go. Okay, status is baking. Excellent. And now we're going to add a new context item called baking time. That's elapsed time since we've started baking this thing. We're going to add it to our status list. And so in order to make that happen, we're going to have another event. So we're going to use that same on as we did in the other states. And in there, we're going to say that we have a tick. Like one tick of our baking timer has gone. And when that happens, we're going to do the same kind of async action that we did on like an address update right above. So we're going to say that the baking time is the context where it's the context baking time plus 1. It's just going to keep on adding plus 1 to the current baking time. So how do we fire that event? Well, that we use a set interval timer for. And the way that we do that is we say that when we're invoked, when this start baking is invoked, it's then going to call this source function. And that function is a function that returns a function that takes a callback. And that's going to do a set of an interval where we fire off that event. So that callback is essentially send. So do baking tick in there, and then we'll give it an interval of say a second, right? Right? Makes sense. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, if you really want to bake your noodle, let's go take this over to our simulator. Pop that in there. And now we're going to go run across like we're customers. Next. And you can see a heartbeat every second on that. The simulator is actually running your code, which is really, really cool. Let's go take a look at the state. You can see the state's updating on the fly. And also the events are coming in. Baking tick, baking tick, baking tick. That's awesome. Really, really cool stuff. Really interesting way to capture that state in a way where you can really visualize it and see what the heck is going on with your state tree, which I think is very interesting. All right, isn't that neat? I mean, that visualizer is just so cool. And the fact that it's running and you can see it, I mean, it's just, I'm just stoked by it. Anyway, all right. So if you have any questions, be sure to put those in the comment section down below. As always, come on to the live stream on Friday and ask any questions you want. I'm not sure I'll be able to answer everything. XState is an amazing API, and I don't know, 10% of it, but it's neat, and we can experiment on it together. In the meantime, if you like the video, be sure to hit that like button. If you really like the video, hit that subscribe button, click on that bell, and you'll be notified the next time a new one of these videos comes out. In the meantime, of course, be happy, be healthy, and be safe.